Ethan Cole had seen many strange things in his life, but nothing prepared him for what he found on that frozen moon. Snowflakes as sharp as glass cut across his face as he worked outside his small cargo ship, tightening a loose panel near the landing gear. The wind howled like an animal, carrying with it the eerie sound of ice cracking somewhere far away. He wanted to finish his repairs quickly and get inside, but then he heard it. At first, it sounded like the wind playing tricks on him. A faint cry swallowed by the storm, but it came again, soft and trembling. A sound that did not belong to the frozen wasteland. It was a voice, a weak voice, almost lost in the howl of the wind. Ethan froze, his tools in hand, scanning the white swirling haze beyond his ship's lights. "Hello," he shouted, but his voice was swallowed by the blizzard. He stepped away from the ship, boots crunching into deep snow, his breath turning to white mist, and then he saw her. She was small, barely reaching his chest, and looked more like a ghost than a living being. Her skin was silver, almost glowing against the snow, and her eyes, they shone faint blue like two tiny stars in the darkness. Her thin clothes were torn, her arms wrapped tightly around herself as if trying to hold her body together. Her lips were pale, trembling with every breath. She was shivering so hard. It looked painful. Ethan rushed to her side, dropping his tools into the snow. "Hey, you're freezing," he said, reaching out to support her. She stumbled against him, her fingers clutching his jacket desperately. Her voice was a whisper, broken and fragile. "Warm. Stay warm. Please." Ethan's instincts kicked in. He pulled her close, feeling how light she was, almost weightless in his arms. Her skin was icy cold, and her body trembled against him like she had been out there for hours. He didn't know who she was, what she was, or how she got here. But he knew one thing: if he left her in this cold, she would die, without another word. He lifted her up and carried her toward the ship, shielding her face from the biting wind. She didn't fight, didn't speak, just buried her face against his chest like she was afraid to let go. The cargo bay doors hissed open, warm air spilling out into the icy night. Ethan stepped inside, and the heat hit them both. He set her down gently on a crate, then pulled a thermal blanket from a nearby storage locker. She let out a soft sound when he wrapped it around her, as if the warmth itself was a relief too great to describe. Up close, Ethan noticed details he hadn't seen outside. Faint patterns on her skin, like silver markings that shifted slightly when she moved. Her hair was white, but not from age. More like spun frost that caught the light in strange ways. She looked at him, her glowing eyes studying his face like she was trying to remember every detail. "Human," she whispered, as if the word itself was rare and precious. Ethan crouched down to her level. "You know what I am?" he asked. She nodded weakly, pulling the blanket tighter around her. I've seen your kind. Once," she said, her voice shaking, "but never this close." Her gaze flicked to his hands, to his face, back to his chest where her small fingers had gripped his jacket. Her lips parted, as if she wanted to say more, but then she just closed her eyes and breathed deeply, like she was trying to soak in his presence. Outside, the storm roared on, but inside the cargo bay, there was a strange stillness. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her than just being lost in the snow. She wasn't wearing survival gear, wasn't carrying any supplies. No one could survive out there like that without help. And yet, here she was, clinging to him like he was the only warmth left in the universe. She opened her eyes again, meeting his gaze. "I can't be alone out there," she said softly. "They'll find me." The way she said "they" sent a shiver through him. But before he could ask who she meant, a loud crack echoed from outside, like something heavy breaking through the ice. Ethan's head snapped toward the sound. The girl's eyes widened, her hands tightening on his sleeve. "They're here," she whispered. The words made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Whoever they were, Ethan had the sudden unshakable feeling that letting them find her would be a mistake he'd regret for the rest of his life. And so, without knowing why, he moved closer to her, his hand resting reassuringly on her shoulder. "We'll keep you warm," he said. Quietly and safe, but in the back of his mind, he knew the real danger had just arrived. The storm outside kept pounding against the cargo bay doors, but inside, the air was warm and heavy with silence. Ethan sat across from the small alien girl, watching steam rise from the cup of heated water he had placed in her trembling hands. She sipped it slowly, her silver eyes never leaving his face. There was something unsettling about the way she looked at him, not with fear, not with distrust, but with an intense focus that made him shift uncomfortably in his seat. Her blanket had slipped off one shoulder, revealing the strange silver markings that ran across her skin like delicate vines. They seemed to pulse faintly with light, almost like they were alive. Ethan told himself not to stare, but she noticed anyway. "You are curious," she said softly, tilting her head. "About me?" Ethan gave a small shrug. "I'm curious about why you were out there in the storm with no gear." She didn't answer immediately, instead pulling the blanket tighter around herself and leaning forward. "You saved me," she whispered, "but I need more than just heat from the air." Before Ethan could ask what she meant, she moved slowly, deliberately, and sat beside him, her small frame pressing against his arm. He felt how cold she still was, her skin icy even after minutes. In the warmth, her voice was quiet, almost embarrassed. "My kind, we keep our life heat by sharing it, through touch." Ethan hesitated, unsure. "Like holding hands?" Her eyes flickered, almost amused. "Closer," she murmured, and before he could react, she slid under his arm, her head resting against his chest. Her hands gripped the fabric of his jacket as if anchoring herself there. Ethan's pulse jumped. "This isn't necessary," he said carefully. Though he didn't push her away, her response was barely audible. "It is, if I want to live." The ship creaked as a gust of wind slammed against its hull, somewhere deep inside the ship. The metal groaned in protest. Ethan's mind told him to set boundaries, to keep the situation under control. But her shivering was real, her breaths uneven. He wrapped an arm around her, feeling her body slowly relax against his side. The heat from him began to seep into her, and she let out a faint sigh. For a moment, there was no danger, no storm, no unknown enemies, just the strange closeness between a human and an alien girl. But Ethan's instincts wouldn't rest. "You said someone's after you," he murmured. She nodded slightly, still not lifting her head from his chest. "They hunt me because of what I am," she said, her voice trembling more from fear than cold. "They want to use me for my gift." Ethan frowned. "What gift?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "If I tell you, you will not let me stay." The way she said it made something in his chest tighten. "You're safe here," he told her. But he wasn't sure if he could keep that promise. The ship's proximity alarm gave a soft, almost hidden beep. Ethan's eyes flicked to the console. Movement outside, through the storm. "Stay here," he whispered, gently moving her aside. But she caught his hand before he could stand, her grip surprisingly strong for someone so small. "Don't leave me," she begged, her glowing eyes wide with fear. Ethan swallowed hard, torn between checking the sensors and keeping her calm. Finally he squeezed her hand and said, "All right, but we need to know who's out there." He moved to the cockpit, and she followed closely, the blanket trailing behind her like a shadow on the screen. Blurry shapes moved through the storm, tall, broad, armed. They walked with purpose, their glowing visors scanning the snow. "They found me," she whispered, her voice breaking. "If they take me, I will never see the stars again." Ethan's jaw clenched. He didn't know her full story, but the fear in her voice was real. And he hated seeing anyone that afraid. The figures were closing in. Ethan shut down the ship's external lights to make them less visible. The cockpit dimmed, the only light coming from the faint glow of the console and her strange, shimmering skin. "They can track my heat," she whispered, pressing closer to him again. "We need to share warmth, hide it. Make my heat signal small." Ethan didn't fully understand her alien biology, but he could see the desperation in her face. She leaned against him again, her body almost curling into his. He told himself it was just survival, but he couldn't ignore the way her heartbeat pressed against his side. Steadying as she stayed in his arms, outside, shadows moved past the ship, their weapons ready. Ethan held his breath, his arm around her, feeling her body grow warmer under the blanket. The trackers paused near the cargo bay door. One of them pressed something against it, a scanning device. The girl's nails dug into his sleeve. Ethan whispered, "Stay still," for a tense, endless moment. All they could hear was the wind and the faint hum of the scanner. Then, without warning, the figures moved on. Fading back into the storm, the girl didn't move until Ethan exhaled. Then she looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. "You didn't give me to them," she said softly, as if it surprised her. Ethan gave a faint smile. "Wasn't planning on it." She leaned her head back against his chest. "Then I will stay here," she whispered, "and keep warm. With you." The storm had begun to ease, but the quiet that followed was worse than the wind. Ethan sat in the cockpit, eyes locked on the sensor display. The alien girl sat beside him, wrapped in the thermal blanket, her knees pulled to her chest. Outside, shapes moved slowly through the snow, their heat signatures faint but steady. Whoever they weren't leaving, they were waiting. Ethan leaned closer to the screen. Zooming in, 4 figures, tall, broad, each carrying a long rifle-like weapon. Their armor gleamed faintly, even in the storm's fading light. The girl's breath caught when she saw them. "They're called hunters," she whispered. "They track people like me." Ethan glanced at her. "People like you? What does that mean?" Her gaze dropped to the floor. "It means they will not stop until they have me, and once they do, no one comes back." The words chilled Ethan more than the frozen air outside. He studied the hunters' movements. Precise, coordinated, too well trained to be ordinary bounty chasers. "They're scanning," the girl murmured, hugging herself tighter, "looking for my heat." Ethan remembered what she had told him earlier. Her species radiated heat differently than humans, easy to track if you knew how. He lowered the ship's power output to reduce their signal. The cockpit dimmed, casting shadows across her pale face. For a few minutes, they sat in silence. Ethan thought maybe the hunters would pass, but then one of them stopped directly in front of the ship, turning its helmet toward the cockpit. Even though they couldn't see inside, Ethan felt like the figure was staring straight at them. The girl's hand gripped his arm tightly, her nails pressing into his jacket. "They can smell fear," she whispered. Ethan doubted that was literal, but he didn't take his eyes off the display. The hunter raised a small device, pressing buttons. A beam of green light swept over the ship. The girl buried her face against Ethan's shoulder. Trembling, when the beam faded, the hunter tilted its head as if listening to something. Then it moved on, joining the others. Ethan didn't relax. "They're not going away," he muttered. The girl looked at him, her eyes glowing faintly in the dark. "They'll keep watching until I make a mistake," she said. "Or until the cold forces us to move." Ethan leaned back in his seat, thinking fast. If they stayed, the hunters would eventually find a way in. If they left, they'd be exposed. Either way, the girl's life was in danger, and now, so was his. Suddenly, the ship's exterior microphone picked up a faint sound. A voice, mechanical, distorted, speaking in an alien language. The girl's eyes widened. "They're telling each other to wait. They think they can freeze us out." Ethan swore under his breath. The temperature outside was dropping fast. Even with the ship's systems running low, eventually the heat would run out. And the moment they turned it back up, the hunters would detect it. The girl shifted closer to him, her blanket slipping slightly, revealing more of the glowing markings on her skin. They won't stop, she said quietly. Not unless... She hesitated, looking down. Not unless what? Ethan pressed. Her voice was barely a whisper. Not unless you give them me. Ethan stared at her, stunned. That's not happening, he said firmly. Her eyes searched his face like she didn't quite believe him. You don't even know me, she said. Why would you risk your life? Ethan's jaw tightened. Because I don't hand people over to be hunted, that's why. She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slightly. Outside, one of the hunters moved closer again. Walking slowly around the ship, Ethan stood. Moving to the storage locker in the cargo bay, he pulled out a portable heat shield, an emergency device meant to mask life signs for short periods. He set it on the floor between them. If we're going to move, we need to do it without them seeing us, he said. The girl tilted her head. Where will we go? Ethan gave a small smirk. Somewhere they won't expect. As he worked on activating the shield, she moved beside him, her small hands brushing his as she helped. Her touch was still cold, but less than before. You're shaking, he said, glancing at her, her lips curved faintly. Not from the cold this time. Ethan didn't ask what she meant. The less distraction right now, the better. The shield flickered to life, casting a faint shimmer around them. Ethan pulled her close, wrapping the blanket tighter around both of them. This will hide us for a few minutes, he said. Once we step outside, stay close and don't let go. She nodded, her glowing eyes fixed on his. Ethan, she said softly, if they catch us, I want you to know. I didn't come here by accident. Before he could ask what she meant, a loud metallic clang echoed through the storm. The hunters were back at the door. Ethan took her hand, his other hand gripping his blaster. Time to move, he said, and together, they stepped into the frozen night, the storm swallowing them whole. The wind bit into Ethan's face the moment they stepped outside. Snow crunched under their boots as the shimmer from the portable heat shield wrapped around them like an invisible cloak. The alien girl stayed close, so close that Ethan could feel her breath on his side. The cold cut through his jacket, but he forced himself to focus, scanning the swirling white for movement. Behind them, the faint silhouettes of the hunters moved. Near the ship, their glowing visors swept across the snow. Searching, the heat shield distorted their thermal scanners. But it wouldn't last forever. Ethan gripped the girl's hand tighter, pulling her along. Her steps were short, quick, and he could hear the strain in her breathing. The blanket trailed behind her, catching snowflakes until it looked like it had grown a layer of frost. They moved toward a jagged ridge of ice, hoping to put solid ground between them and the hunter's line of sight. Every crunch of snow underfoot felt like it was too loud. Every gust of wind sounded like it was carrying voices. When they reached the ridge, Ethan crouched low, pulling her down beside him. He peeked over the icy edge. The hunters were still near the ship, but one of them had started walking in their general direction. They'll find our tracks, he muttered. The girl leaned close to his ear, her voice trembling. I can hide them, but it will cost me heat. Before Ethan could respond, she knelt in the snow, placing her small hands flat against it. The markings on her skin glowed brighter, and slowly, the snow beneath their feet began to shift, covering their trail. Ethan stared in quiet shock. It was like the snow itself obeyed her. When she was done, her shoulders sagged, and her shivering returned even harder than before. Without thinking, Ethan pulled her against him, wrapping the blanket around both of them. You're burning yourself out, he said, his voice low. Her lips curved faintly despite the cold. Better than letting them take me. The warmth between them grew quickly, but Ethan knew it wasn't enough to keep her stable for long. The storm was easing, and with it, the natural cover they had was disappearing. He scanned the landscape ahead. In the distance, faint lights flickered. An old survey station, he said, pointing. If we can get there, we can seal ourselves inside and regroup. She nodded, still leaning against him. But as they began moving again, a sharp crack echoed through the air. A beam of green light shot past them, hitting the snow and leaving a smoking hole. "They see us!" Ethan shouted, pulling her into a sprint. The heat shield fizzled under the energy blast, breaking apart like shattered glass. Another shot streaked past, close enough that he could feel the heat on his face. The girl clung to him, her small frame surprisingly strong as she kept up with his pace. Ethan didn't look back. The hunters would be right behind them. Every step toward the station felt like a lifetime. Finally, they reached the steel hatch of the survey station. Ethan slammed his fist against the control panel. It was dead. The girl's glowing hands reached past him, pressing against the frozen metal. The markings on her arms pulsed like fire under ice, and the hatch gave a loud metallic groan before unlocking. They stumbled inside, slamming the door shut behind them. The sound of the storm faded instantly, replaced by the heavy, echoing silence of the abandoned station. The inside was dark except for the dim emergency lights. Dust floated in the still air, and frozen equipment lined the walls. Ethan leaned against the door, breathing hard. The girl was pressed against him, her chest rising and falling quickly. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded slowly, then looked up at him with an expression he couldn't read. "You didn't let go," she whispered. He gave a short, almost confused laugh. "Of course I didn't." Her eyes lingered on his face for a moment. Longer before she looked away. They moved deeper into the station, finding a small operations room with a half-functioning heater. Ethan got it running enough to take the chill off the air. The girl sat close to it, but then stood and walked toward him instead. "The air heat won't be enough," she said quietly. "I still need you." He hesitated, knowing exactly what she meant, but when she stepped closer, her small hands gripping his sleeve, he didn't move back. She leaned into him, pulling the blanket over both of them again. Her body was cold, but it warmed quickly in his arms. And for a few moments, Ethan forgot the hunters, forgot the danger. All he could focus on was her steady breathing and the faint glow of her skin in the dark. Then a noise shattered the calm, a faint thud, followed by the sound of boots on metal. Ethan's head snapped toward the door. "They found us," he said. The girl's grip tightened. "They won't stop," she whispered. "Not until one of us is gone." The heavy thud of boots echoed through the old survey station. Ethan's eyes darted to the narrow ventilation shaft above them. It was small, barely big enough for the alien girl, but it was their only chance. "They're at the outer hall," he whispered. Her silver eyes locked on his, filled with fear but also trust. "I won't leave you," she said, shaking her head. "You'll have to if you want to live," he replied, already pulling a small tool from his belt to unscrew the vent cover. The pounding on the hatch door grew louder, each hit sending dust falling from the ceiling. "They're breaking in," she breathed. Ethan grabbed her by the shoulders, his voice low and urgent. "Crawl through, follow it to the storage bay. There's an emergency exit that leads outside. I'll meet you there." She hesitated for only a moment before climbing into the shaft. Before disappearing, she looked back. "You better keep your promise." Ethan smirked faintly. "Always." The moment she vanished into the shaft, the hatch door burst open with a deafening crash. 4 hunters stepped inside, their weapons raised, their visors glowing cold and unfeeling. Ethan fired first, hitting one square in the chest. The shot bounced off heavy armor. They returned fire instantly, bolts of green light sizzling past him. Ethan ducked behind a console, returning shots while backing toward the far corridor. He knew he couldn't win a straight fight, but he could buy her time in the ventilation shaft. The girl crawled as fast as she could. The metal was icy under her hands, her breaths quick and shallow. She could hear the muffled sound of weapons below, each blast making her heart pound harder. The shaft opened into the storage bay. Just like Ethan said, she dropped down, her feet hitting the floor with a soft thud. Snow swirled in through a partially open hatch on the far wall, the exit. But before she could run, a shadow moved in the corner. One of the hunters had circled around, blocking her way. Her breath caught as the hunter stepped forward. It spoke in a harsh metallic voice. "You cannot run. You belong to us." She shook her head, backing away. "No, I belong to myself." The hunter raised its weapon, but before it could fire, a blast from the doorway knocked it to the ground. Ethan stood there, smoke rising from his blaster. "Miss me?" he asked with a grin. The girl ran to him, and without a word, he grabbed her hand. Pulling her toward the hatch, they burst outside into the blinding snow. The wind screamed around them, but at least it covered their escape. Ethan kept them moving, heading toward the dark silhouette of a rocky gorge in the distance. The hunters followed, their armor lights glowing like small beacons in the storm. Shots sizzled through the air, melting snow where they struck. Ethan and the girl ducked low, using the uneven terrain as cover. Her small fingers clung to his hand, refusing to let go. As they neared the gorge, the ground dropped steeply into a narrow path lined with jagged ice. "This way!" Ethan shouted over the wind. They slid down the slope, the ice scraping against their clothes. At the bottom, the walls of the gorge rose high around them, muffling the sound of the storm. But the echo of approaching boots told them the hunters were still coming. The girl's breath came in quick bursts, her skin cold again despite the blanket still wrapped around her. "You're freezing," Ethan said, pulling her close for a moment as they moved. "Stay with me." She nodded weakly. "I'm not letting go." The gorge twisted and turned until it opened into a hidden cave. Inside, the air was slightly warmer, and the walls shimmered faintly with crystals. Ethan guided her inside, both of them sinking to the ground for a moment's rest. But there was no time to relax. The sound of the hunter's boots grew louder again. "They're tracking us too well," Ethan muttered. The girl looked at the glowing crystals, then at him. "I can stop them, but it will take all my heat." Ethan frowned. "And what happens to you if you do?" She gave a small, sad smile. "Then you'll have to keep me warm until I can breathe again." Before he could argue, she stepped toward the cave entrance, her markings glowing brighter than ever. The air around her shimmered, and suddenly, the snow outside whipped into a violent whirl, sealing the gorge in a wall of ice and wind. The hunters' lights faded in the storm, their voices lost when she turned back to Ethan. Her skin was pale, her body trembling violently. He rushed to her, catching her before she collapsed. "You're insane," he muttered, wrapping the blanket around both of them and holding her tight. Her voice was faint, almost gone. "I trust you." They sat there in the dark, the storm outside sealing them in. Ethan's heartbeat slowed as he realized the hunters couldn't reach them now, but he also knew this was only a pause, not the end. And as her head rested against his chest, her breathing soft and shallow, he promised himself that no matter what happened next, he wouldn't let her out of his arms again. The cave was silent except for the soft sound of Ethan's breathing and the faint wind slipping through cracks in the ice. The girl lay in his arms, wrapped in the blanket, her skin ice cold but slowly warming. Her glowing markings had dimmed to almost nothing, as if whatever energy kept them bright had been drained away. Ethan adjusted the blanket around her shoulders, pulling her closer. "You shouldn't have done that," he murmured. "You almost froze yourself." Her eyes fluttered open, and a weak smile touched her lips. "I saved us," she whispered. "That's worth it." Ethan studied her face. So delicate, almost fragile, but beneath that was a stubbornness that reminded him of soldiers he'd served with. "You keep talking about them, and you're kind like I should understand," he said. "But I don't. So maybe you should start explaining." She was quiet for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the shimmering crystals in the cave walls. "My name is Lyra," she said finally. "I come from a world called Ilvora, far from here, my people. We are different from most species." Ethan listened closely as she spoke, her voice slow and careful. "We are born with the ability to give heat, not just warmth, but life energy. It can heal wounds, bring back strength, even restart a failing heart. That's why they want me." Ethan frowned. "The hunters?" She nodded, her expression tightening. They capture people like me and drain us. They use our heat to power their machines, their weapons. They're soldiers. Ethan's jaw clenched. And you ran. Yes, she said softly. But running comes with a cost. She shifted slightly in his arms so she could look at him directly. In my culture, sharing heat the way I did with you, it means something. It is not just survival. Ethan tilted his head. What does it mean? Her cheeks flushed faintly, the silver in her skin glowing warmer. It means I chose you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. In the old ways of my people, it is a bond, a promise that my life is now tied to yours. Ethan blinked, taken aback. You're saying you bonded with me? Without telling me. She looked away, guilt flickering in her eyes. If I told you before, you might have let me go, she murmured. And I couldn't let that happen. For a moment, Ethan didn't know what to say. He thought about every time she had clung to him. Every time she had pressed close to keep warm. It had never been just about the cold. You tricked me, he said quietly, though there was no real anger in his voice. I saved you too, she countered softly, meeting his gaze again. That bond. It works both ways, Ethan sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. So what happens now? You're stuck with me forever? She gave a small smile. It's not such a terrible fate, is it? Before Ethan could answer, a distant sound broke the moment. A faint metallic scrape from somewhere outside the cave. Both of them froze. They're searching, Lyra whispered. Even the storm won't stop them for long, Ethan shifted. Pulling his blaster from his side, they can try, he said, his tone cold. But Lyra caught his arm, her expression serious. They'll keep coming because of me. If they find us, you'll be in danger until your last breath. Then they won't find us, Ethan replied firmly. Not while I'm breathing, Lyra studied him. Something soft and unreadable in her gaze. You don't understand, she said quietly. That bond means my heat will always find you, even across space. I will always be a beacon to them unless... She trailed off, and Ethan narrowed his eyes. Unless what? She looked down, her fingers tightening in the blanket. Unless we complete the bond fully, she whispered. Then I can hide it inside you. Mask it from them. They will not be able to track me. Ethan's brows drew together. And what does completing the bond mean? Her cheeks flushed deeper, and she hesitated before answering. It means I give you all my heat, every drop, and trust you to keep me alive until I can recover. Ethan exhaled slowly, realizing the weight of what she was suggesting. If I fail, you die, he said flatly. Yes, she agreed, her tone calm despite the danger. But if we don't, they will find us, and we both die. They sat in silence for a long moment, the sound of the wind and the faint scrape outside filling the air. Finally, Ethan reached out, brushing a strand of white hair from her face. You've been making choices for both of us since I found you in that snow, he said, his voice low. This time I choose, and I'm not letting them take you. Her eyes widened, and then she gave a small, almost relieved smile. Then you accept? He nodded once. I accept. Lyra leaned forward, pressing her forehead to his. The glow of her markings grew brighter, spreading from her arms to her shoulders, her chest, and then to him. Warmth surged through Ethan, not just heat but something deeper. Strength, clarity, a pulse of life that made every breath feel easier. For a moment, he felt like they were the only two beings in the universe. When the light faded, she slumped. Against him, her breathing shallow, Ethan held her close, feeling the last traces of her heat settling into his own body. Outside, the faint sound of hunters' boots echoed again. This time, Ethan wasn't afraid. The faint echo of boots outside. The cave grew sharper. Ethan tightened his arms around Lyra, feeling her light frame pressed against him. Her glow had faded to a faint shimmer after giving him her heat, and her breathing was soft but steady. They're close, she whispered, her voice barely more than air. Ethan glanced toward the cave entrance, the pale light from the storm outside spilling in. "They're not taking you," he said quietly, but with a steel in his tone that made Lyra look at him differently. He stood slowly, keeping her wrapped in the blanket. Her body was weak now, too drained to move fast. "I can walk," she said. But her legs trembled the moment they touched the ground. Ethan shook his head. "Not a chance," and lifted her into his arms. The warmth she had given him was still inside him, running like fire through his veins. It was strange. He could feel her heartbeat as if it was his own. The bond they had completed wasn't just words now, it was alive. Shadows moved across the snow outside. Ethan crouched behind a jagged ice wall inside the cave, keeping her close as he watched. 4 hunters approached, their visors glowing like small suns in the white haze. They moved in a careful formation, weapons ready. One stopped, raising a scanner. Ethan felt Lyra's grip tighten on his jacket. "They're searching for my heat," she whispered. "But it's inside you now. That's why they can't see me clearly." The scanner's light passed over the cave entrance and hesitated. Ethan knew they were suspicious. If they came inside, there would be no running this time. He glanced at the blaster in his free hand, then at the charges in his belt. Not enough to fight them all in open combat. But he didn't need to fight all of them, just stop them long enough to escape. When the first hunter stepped inside, Ethan moved. A single silent step forward. Then he fired, not at the hunter, but at the ice wall above him. The blast shattered the ice, sending a heavy sheet crashing down, blocking the entrance. The sudden noise echoed through the cave like thunder. Snow and shards of frozen crystal fell between them and the remaining hunters outside. Ethan turned and started moving deeper into the cave network. Lyra clung to him, her voice tense. "They'll dig through, then we'll be gone before they do," he said. The narrow tunnel ahead twisted and turned until it opened to a steep drop into the gorge below. The storm still raged there, hiding everything under thick white. Ethan looked down, then at her. "Hold tight," he warned. Her arms tightened around his neck. "Always." He stepped off the edge, sliding down the icy slope with a speed that stole his breath. Snow sprayed up around them as they descended. At the bottom, Ethan kept running, guided by instinct and the faint light of distant cliffs behind them. Faint voices shouted over the wind. The hunters were on the move again. They reached a narrow crack in the cliff face, barely wide enough to squeeze through. Inside, the wind died completely, and the darkness swallowed them. Ethan stopped, breathing hard. Lyra shifted in his arms, her hand resting lightly over his chest. "You're burning hot," she murmured. "That's your heat," he replied. "It's keeping me moving." Her eyes searched his face. "You feel it too? The bond?" He nodded. "Feels like you're a part of me now." For a moment, silence filled the small space. Then a faint metallic thud echoed from outside. "They found the slope," Ethan said. He set her down gently, pulling out the last of his charges. "These will bring the cliff down if they get too close." Lyra's eyes widened. "You could be trapped too." Ethan gave her a half smile. "Better trapped together than letting them take you." The hunters' visors appeared at the far end of the gorge, blowing through the snow. Ethan placed the charges along the narrow opening of the crack. The moment the first hunter's shadow crossed into view, he hit the detonator. The explosion shook the ground, and the cliff face collapsed in a roaring wall of ice and stone. When the dust settled, there was nothing but silence. Ethan leaned against the wall, the weight of exhaustion settling into him. Lyra was already beside him, her small hands on his arm. "You did it," she said softly. "They can't reach us now." He nodded slowly. "For now." She tilted her head, studying him. "You'd risk your life for me again, wouldn't you?" Ethan gave her a steady look. "It's not a risk anymore, it's just what I do." She smiled faintly, then leaned against his chest. "You are my warmth now, Ethan," she whispered. "No matter where we are." He wrapped the blanket tighter around them both, feeling the bond between them pulsing like a second heartbeat. Outside, the storm still raged, but here in the dark, they were safe. And Ethan knew that as long as she stayed in his arms, no hunter in the galaxy would ever take her again.